Iran Daily Briefing, Thursday, May 28, 2026. The United States carried out strikes in southern Iran on Thursday, May 28, and Iran says it retaliated by targeting a US base. France 24 describes the US action as a defensive strike after officials said they observed aggressive Iranian military activity. Tehran describes it as a US attack near Bandar Abbas that required retaliation. Today, we are focusing on that exchange, the Strait of Hormuz dispute around it, the state of US-Iran talks, and Iran's partial restoration of internet access. This is Iran Daily Briefing for Thursday, May 28, 2026. The central story today is the military exchange in southern Iran. France 24 reports that the US military carried out a strike against Iran on Thursday. Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye report that the strikes took place near Bandar Abbas. Iran's Revolutionary Guards say they then targeted a US base. The exchange sits inside a larger set of unresolved issues. Washington and Tehran are still talking about a possible deal. The Strait of Hormuz remains disputed in official language. The United States has added the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to a sanctions list. And inside Iran, internet access is returning after a long shutdown. But users and rights-focused reporting describe access as slow, uneven, and still heavily restricted on major platforms. We will start with the military exchange. Then we will turn to sanctions and strait-related incidents, the negotiations track, and the domestic internet story. The top story today is the US-Iran military exchange in southern Iran. France 24 reports that the US military conducted a defensive strike against Iran on Thursday. The same outlet says officials reported aggressive activity by the Iranian military before the strike. France 24 also reports that the strike targeted a military site and that it was the second defensive US strike against Iran this week. Al Jazeera reports that the United States launched strikes near Bandar Abbas and that Iran reported no casualties from those strikes. Middle East Eye also reports US strikes near Bandar Abbas, including near Bandar Abbas Airport. Iran's Revolutionary Guards say they responded by targeting a US base. Middle East Eye reports that the IRGC said it targeted a US airbase at 4:50 a.m. local time in response to a US attack near Bandar Abbas Airport. Al Jazeera reports that the IRGC said it targeted a base used by US forces after US attacks on a site near Bandar Abbas. France 24 reports that Tehran retaliated by targeting a US base after US strikes in southern Iran. The reports leave two competing official accounts. Washington describes a defensive strike after aggressive Iranian activity. Tehran describes a US attack that required retaliation. The exchange also follows an unresolved item from earlier this week. France 24 and the BBC have reported the May 25 US strikes in southern Iran, and US Central Command described those as self-defense strikes. Iran accused the United States of violating the ceasefire. Today's France 24 reporting describes Thursday's US action as the second defensive strike that week. France 24 also reports that Thursday's clashes were the most serious since an April ceasefire began. There is another claim to keep separate. Iran's claim that it downed a US drone remains only Iran's claim in the supplied intelligence. There is no independent confirmation in today's reporting packet. Tehran's public response came through both military and diplomatic channels. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai condemned the US attack on areas near Bandar Abbas, according to Middle East Eye. Middle East Eye and Mehr News Agency also report that Baghai condemned what he called US threatening rhetoric against Iran and regional countries, including Oman. Middle East Eye says he expressed solidarity with Oman after what he called US officials' threats. Washington's public language is also hardening. France 24 reports that Donald Trump threatened to finish the job if Tehran did not agree to a deal. Al-Monitor reports that Trump said at a White House cabinet meeting that Iranian leaders had miscalculated if they thought the November midterm elections would force him into a deal. Al-Monitor also reports that Trump said he did not care about the midterm elections in the context of Iran's leadership trying to outweigh him. The Strait of Hormuz is directly connected to that public language. Al Jazeera reports that Trump said he would not allow Iran to control the Strait of Hormuz under any deal reached with Tehran. Al-Monitor reports that Trump told reporters during a White House cabinet meeting that the Strait of Hormuz is international waters and would be open to everybody. Al-Monitor also reports that, when asked about a short-term deal allowing Iran and Oman to control the strait, Trump said Oman must behave or the United States would blow them up. Middle East Eye reports a similar formulation, saying Trump threatened to blow up Oman if it agreed to work with Iran to impose a fee for ships transiting the strait. The same reporting places the exchange alongside sanctions, Strait of Hormuz disputes and ongoing deal talks, but does not establish how either side is formally linking those issues. That distinction matters. The military exchange is confirmed in several reports. The wider diplomatic meaning is still being defined by public statements, sanctions actions, and negotiations that have not produced a final text in the supplied intelligence. There is also a regional dimension. Middle East Eye reports that Kaja Kallas told reporters at a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Cyprus that the war on Iran was in a dangerous zone between war and peace. France 24 reports that US-led diplomacy with Iran was underway as Israeli officials sought to pressure Hezbollah. Separately, Al-Monitor reports that the Israeli military said, on Thursday it had begun new strikes on Hezbollah infrastructure around the southern Lebanese city of Tyre. Those are separate developments, but they show that today's Iran file is not confined to one military incident. It includes US-Iran exchanges, maritime pressure, diplomacy, sanctions, and regional military activity. The concrete thing to watch next is whether Washington or Tehran provides more detail on the Thursday strikes. The target, the base. Iran says it hit any damage assessment and whether either side frames the exchange as closed or continuing. Our first developing story is the Strait of Hormuz track. Sanctions, vessel incidents, and deal language. Al-Monitor and Middle East Eye report that the United States added the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to its specially designated nationals list on Wednesday, according to the Treasury Department website. Al-Monitor describes the Persian Gulf Strait Authority as a body Iran set up to manage requests for passage through the Strait of Hormuz. The sanctioning comes as the strait remains a live issue in negotiations and on the water. As we covered Wednesday, strait-related terms remain unresolved. France 24 says the strait remains a sticking point. Middle East Eye reports a sanctions waiver formulation under which Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for a waiver on oil sales. That formulation has not been confirmed by both governments. Today's reporting adds two concrete developments. First, the US action against the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. Second, vessel incidents. Middle East Eye reports that Iranian forces fired warning shots at 4 vessels attempting to cross the Strait of Hormuz, citing state broadcaster IRIB. Middle East Eye also reports that IRIB said the 4 vessels attempted to enter the Persian Gulf through the strait without coordination with security forces. There is a separate maritime complaint from South Korea. Iran International reports that South Korea summoned Iran's ambassador on Wednesday to protest an attack on a South Korean-operated vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran International also cites Yonhap as reporting that investigators found the vessel was likely hit by Iranian-developed anti-ship missiles. Markets are reacting to the negotiations track, not only to the military track. Al Jazeera reports that markets were betting that a US-Iran deal would reopen the strait. Oilprice.com reports that oil prices dropped by around 4% early on Wednesday, May 27, as traders bet on a US-Iran deal. Al Jazeera also reports that markets rallied amid hopes of a deal. The forward marker here is specific. Watch whether the United States or Iran confirms any formal Strait arrangement, including any sanctions waiver language, and whether Tehran or Washington gives an official account of the vessel incidents. Our second developing story is the US-Iran negotiations track. The public messages today point in more than one direction. The BBC reports that President Trump said the United States was not yet satisfied with the terms of a potential Iran deal. The BBC also reports that Trump said he believed Iran wanted to reach a deal. France 24 reported on May 27th that Trump's efforts to find a deal with Iran were under scrutiny. France 24 also reported that US-led diplomacy with Iran was underway as Israeli officials sought to pressure Hezbollah. Middle East Eye reports that peace talks between Iran and the United States were still ongoing when US strikes on Bandar Abbas escalated the conflict. There are several unresolved negotiation details from Wednesday that remain important today. France 24 reported that a top Iranian official delegation in Qatar said it was finalizing a 14-point framework for a deal to end the war. At the same time, Washington and Tehran were still managing expectations around whether the outcome would be a final deal or a memorandum of understanding. France 24 also reported that Trump said negotiations were proceeding nicely and that Secretary of State Marco Rubio maintained that a deal could be reached within days. On the nuclear file, France 24 reports that Trump was moving toward Iran's position regarding destruction of enriched uranium. But the full negotiating language is not available in the supplied intelligence. On sanctions and assets, Middle East Eye reports that Ali Bagheri Khani, the Deputy Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, demanded the release of all frozen Iranian assets from the United States. Middle East Eye says he described those frozen assets as the legal right of the Iranian people. It also reports that Tasnim quoted him as saying Iran's frozen funds must be released unconditionally. There is also outside commentary on the diplomatic architecture. The Atlantic Council reports that its Vice President Matthew Kroenig was interviewed on NPR on May 27th. The Atlantic Council says Kroenig argued that President Trump is pushing for more countries to join the Abraham Accords to help secure a viable deal with Iran. The thing to watch is whether the negotiating parties move from public characterization to text, a final deal, a memorandum of understanding, or a continued statement that no acceptable terms have yet been reached. Our third developing story is Internet access inside Iran. NPR reports that Iranians began to regain Internet access after authorities ended a months-long shutdown. The BBC reports that Iran's government imposed an Internet blackout after the start of the war with the United States and Israel in February. The BBC says the blackout cut most Iranians off from the outside world. The restoration is incomplete. Users told NPR that Internet service in Iran was slow and spotty in some areas after access began returning. NPR also reports that apps including YouTube and Instagram remained heavily restricted. The Times of Israel cites a tracking company saying Internet connectivity in Iran was around 86% of its pre-cutoff capacity. There is now a political dispute inside Iran over the restoration. Iran International reports that hardliners accused President Masoud Pezeshkian's government of bypassing powerful security and cyberspace institutions after Iran's partial restoration of international Internet access. This is a domestic story with direct political stakes. It affects communication, public access to information, and the internal balance between the elected government and security-linked institutions. The forward marker is whether mobile access and international platforms open further or whether the restoration remains partial, slow, and restricted. Our fourth developing story is a brief regional and diplomatic roundup. Mehr News Agency and Arna report that Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal and International Affairs Kazem Garibabadi on Wednesday welcomed Ireland's move to ban imports from Israeli settlements. This is a lower impact item today, but it fits Tehran's wider diplomatic messaging around Israel. IRNA and Mayor also identify Ali Akbar Velayati as a senior advisor to the leader of the Islamic Revolution. Business Line reports that 10 Indian seafarers arrested in Iran on diesel smuggling charges last July had been released. This is a consular and maritime item, separate from the Strait incidents reported today. The thing to watch on these lower-tier items is whether any of them becomes linked by officials to the main negotiation or maritime tracks. In today's supplied reporting, that linkage is not established. At the start, we said today's central development was the US strike in southern Iran and Iran's reported retaliation. Here is the fuller picture from today's reporting. France 24 says the US military carried out a defensive strike against Iran on Thursday after officials reported aggressive Iranian military activity. France 24 says the strike targeted a military site and describes it as the second defensive US strike that week. Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye place the US strikes near Bandar Abbas. Al Jazeera reports Iran said there were no casualties. Middle East Eye reports that the IRGC said it targeted a US airbase at 4:50 a.m. local time in response to a US attack near Bandar Abbas airport. Iran's foreign ministry condemned the US action. Washington, meanwhile, is also pressing its position on the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said he would not allow Iran to control the strait under any deal, according to Al Jazeera, and said the strait is international waters and would be open to everybody, according to Al Monitor. At the same time, talks continue. The BBC reports Trump said the United States is not yet satisfied with the terms of a potential deal, but also that he believes Iran wants one. Middle East Eye reports that peace talks were still ongoing when the Bandar Abbas strikes escalated the conflict. That is the core picture today. A new military exchange, unresolved ceasefire questions from the May 25 strikes, continuing negotiations, and a strait dispute that remains unsettled in official terms. In the next 24 to 48 hours, watch 4 items. First, watch for official detail on Thursday's military exchange. France 24 reports the United States carried out a defensive strike in southern Iran. Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye report strikes near Bandar Abbas. Iran's Revolutionary Guards say they targeted a US base in response. The next useful markers are official details on the targets, damage, casualties, or whether either side says the exchange has ended. Second, watch the Strait of Hormuz language. France 24 says the strait remains a sticking point. Middle East Eye reports a sanctions waiver formulation for reopening the strait, but that remains unconfirmed by both governments. Today's reporting adds US sanctions on the Persian Gulf Strait Authority and reports of warning shots involving 4 vessels. Third, watch the negotiations track. France 24 reported that an Iranian delegation in Qatar said it was finalizing a 14-point framework. The BBC reports, Trump said the United States is not yet satisfied with the terms of a potential deal, while also saying he believes Iran wants a deal. France 24 reports, Trump was moving toward Iran's position regarding destruction of enriched uranium, but the full negotiating language is not available in the supplied intelligence. Fourth, watch domestic internet access. NPR reports service is returning, but remains slow and spotty in some areas, with YouTube and Instagram still heavily restricted. The Times of Israel cites a tracking company saying connectivity is around 86% of pre-cut-off capacity. Iran International reports hardliner criticism of the restoration process. Today's episode covered the US-Iran military exchange near Bandar Abbas, the unresolved Strait of Hormuz dispute, sanctions on the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, continuing negotiations, and Iran's partial internet restoration. We'll be back tomorrow with the next Iran Daily Briefing. For full written briefs and source-backed updates, check out the Iran Brief on Substack. Paid members can build multi-country monitoring across the countries they care about, with personalized briefings delivered automatically.